Number 1. The Shigir Idol. In 1890, gold miners working a peat bog at the Kerinsky Pit, about 100 kilometers north of Yekaterinburg in the Ural Mountains, pulled something strange out of the muck. It was wood. Carved wood. Faces stared back at them from a tall, narrow plank, and the surface was covered in lines and zigzags that meant nothing to anyone. They had no idea they were holding the oldest monumental wooden sculpture ever found on Earth. The bog is the only reason it exists at all. Peat is acidic and starved of oxygen, so the bacteria that should have rotted this wood to nothing simply could not work. The idol was carved from a single split trunk of Siberian larch. A wood chosen, we think, because it resists rot and splits into long, straight planks. Everywhere else on the planet, wooden art this old decayed and vanished. Here, the swamp kept it. For a long time, nobody guessed how old it really was. When radiocarbon dating in 1997 returned an age of around 9,500 years, many researchers refused to believe it. It seemed impossible. Then, in 2018, a team led by Thomas Terberger ran accelerator mass spectrometry on the inner wood and pushed the date back even further to roughly 12,500 years. That is more than twice the age of Stonehenge, more than twice the age of the Egyptian pyramids. This thing was carved while the last ice age was still releasing its grip. It originally stood about 5.3 meters tall. Today it is only 3.4 meters because a lower section was lost during the Soviet era. Along its length sit at least 8 human-like faces stacked one above another, separated by bands of chevrons, straight lines, and dots. Mikhail Zhilin of the Russian Academy of Sciences believes these markings encode something, a mythology, a cosmology, a way of seeing the world. But here is the wall we hit. The people who carved it were Mesolithic hunter-gatherers. They had no writing, there is no key. Microscopic study found the cuts were made with a stone chisel and what looks like a sharpened beaver jaw. During recent conservation work, another face was discovered that earlier drawings had missed. Was the stacking of faces a hierarchy of spirits like a totem pole? Were the alternating stern and open expressions deliberate opposites? Some say yes. Others warn we are simply pouring our own minds into ancient holes. And that is the honest position. We can describe every groove. We cannot read a single word of what it says. The Shigir Idol survived because its makers left nothing else behind, and that is exactly why its message is sealed forever. It is the first warning of a pattern we will see again and again. Number 2. The Longyou Caves. In June of 1992, villagers in Xi'an in Zhejiang province in eastern China decided to drain ponds they had always assumed were bottomless. They set up pumps and waited. As the water level dropped, it revealed not mud but vast hand-carved chambers reaching down into the earth, chambers no living person knew were there. There are at least 24 of them, cut into soft reddish siltstone. The scale is hard to absorb. A single cavern can run 30 meters deep with a floor covering as much as 2,000 square meters and a ceiling soaring tens of meters overhead. Add them together, and the builders removed hundreds of thousands of cubic meters of solid rock. And here's the first impossible detail. Nobody has ever found the spoil. All that excavated stone, enough to bury a town, simply is not anywhere nearby. Every surface tells the same story. The walls and ceilings carry uniform, parallel chisel marks running in neat diagonal bands, a consistent, standardized method repeated across all 24 caves. The walls are angled deliberately. The ceilings are supported by evenly spaced pillars. This is engineering, not random digging, yet inside these enormous spaces there are no tools, no coins, no statues, and no inscriptions. Nothing to name the builders, nothing to date the work. Now consider the second impossible detail. Not one local record mentions them. No gazetteer, no dynastic history, no folktale. A project that may have demanded around 1,000 workers laboring for years left no paper trail at all. How do you hide a public works project that size from history itself? The theories pull in different directions. The mainstream leaning idea is that these were quarries. But that fails to explain the decorative consistency of the chisel marks, and it fails to explain where the stone went. A second theory says they were barracks or storehouses for an army, or perhaps an unfinished imperial tomb. A third points to the carved horse, bird, and fish near some entrances, and argues for a temple or ritual space. Each theory leaves a hole. There is one more detail that unsettles engineers. The walls separating neighboring caverns are sometimes less than a meter thick. The diggers, working in near total darkness with no modern surveying, somehow knew precisely where the next chamber was without breaking through. Maintaining those angles and ceiling heights blind is a genuine technical feat. The best guesses place the work at least 2,000 years ago, perhaps in the Qin period or earlier, but nothing is fixed. At least the caves are unquestionably man-made. Hold on to that certainty, because the next mystery on this list is one where we cannot even agree on that much. Number 3. The Klerksdorp Spheres. In the pyrrhophyllite mines near Ottosdal in South Africa, miners kept finding small, strange spheres. Some are nearly perfect balls, others are flattened discs with a raised ridge around the middle, like a tiny planet with one bold equator. And running around, many of them are up to 3 crisp parallel grooves, so regular they look machined. Now add the part that breaks your sense of time. The rock they come from is between 2.8 and 3 billion years old. There is no complex life on Earth to shape anything, just oceans and bacteria. You can see why these objects became famous in fringe literature, where they were sold as proof that some intelligence manufactured them billions of years ago. They sit in a long tradition of so-called out-of-place artifacts. And to an untrained eye, the case feels strong. The grooves are too neat, the symmetry is too clean. But geologists, including Bruce Cairncross, identified them for what they are: natural concretions and nodules built from minerals like hematite, wollastonite, goethite, and pyrite. The shape comes from minerals precipitating outward around a central nucleus, a process that produces spheres all over the planet. The famous grooves are simply fine sedimentary layers, exposed as the sphere weathered out of the surrounding rock. A popular story that one specimen rotated on its own inside a sealed museum case traces back to nothing more than building vibration. So the science is, in fact, settled. These are natural. And yet they remain a perfect teaching tool because they expose something about us. Humans are pattern finders. We are wired to read intention into symmetry, to see a groove and assume a maker. That instinct is called pareidolia. And it is the same instinct that finds faces in clouds. Similar grooved concretions occur in other rock formations worldwide, which only confirms the natural explanation. The claim that the mineral is harder than steel has been exaggerated along the way. There is still a real and permanent limit here, though. Mining destroys the surrounding context the moment a sphere is pulled free. The exact local chemistry, the precise sequence of events over billions of years that grew each individual sphere, can never be directly observed. We have the general mechanism. We will never replay the specific history. It is worth clearing up one more thing. These South African spheres are constantly confused with the giant stone spheres of Costa Rica, which are completely unrelated and entirely man-made. We will reach those shortly. The Klerksdorp Spheres teach the harder lesson first. If blind nature can fake the signature of design this convincingly, then how do we ever prove that something was truly built? That question carries us straight to a place where the stonework is so precise that people still argue about how human hands could possibly have done it. Number 4. Puma Punku. High on the Bolivian plateau near Lake Titicaca, at an altitude of about 3,850 meters, lies a field of broken stone that has frustrated investigators for a century. Puma Punku, the Gate of the Puma, is part of the Great Tiwanaku Complex. Construction here dates to around 500 to 600 CE, with the wider Tiwanaku state flourishing until roughly 1000 CE. What stops people in their tracks are the blocks. Some red sandstone slabs weigh more than 100 tons, the heaviest around 130 tons, quarried and hauled from kilometers away. But it is the gray andesite pieces that feel almost wrong. They have flat faces, sharp internal right angles, drilled holes, and identical H-shaped notches, repeated again and again as if cut from a single template. This is modular construction, a kit of interchangeable parts, planned and standardized. To lock the blocks together, the builders cut precise I-shaped and T-shaped channels and filled them with a copper, arsenic, and nickel alloy. In some cases, that metal was poured molten directly into the stone on site. That means they were running metallurgy right there in the build. And yet they had no iron tools, and they left no writing. So how is the andesite shaped? Andesite is hard, around 6 on the Mohs scale, which is exactly why the precision impresses modern engineers. The mainstream answer is patient, Organized labor over long periods using harder hammerstones, sand as an abrasive, and careful pecking to grind the surfaces flat. Experimental archaeologists have replicated some of these cuts using period-plausible methods, which narrows the mystery. The fringe answer reaches for lost technology, for molds that cast the stone like concrete, even for non-human help. Those claims have no supporting evidence, but they survive precisely because the tolerances are so clean. There's a poignant detail in the rubble. The complex was never finished. Blocks lie scattered and unplaced as if the work simply stopped one day. The leading explanation is a prolonged drought around 1000 CE that broke the Tiwanaku society. And when a society like that collapses, the labor force scatters, and the specialized knowledge, the exact techniques, and the meaning of the layout dies with the people who held it. Earthquakes, looters, colonial-era stone robbing, and even a railway have since scrambled the original arrangement. The nearby Gateway of the Sun carries a carved figure known as the Staff God, whose meaning is also undeciphered. Proposed astronomical alignments are hard to confirm now that the blocks have been moved, so Puma Punku gives us a culture skilled enough to pour metal into stone, yet they wrote nothing down. The next mystery flips that completely. It comes from a people who absolutely did write, and we still cannot read a single line. Number 5. The Indus Valley Script. Picture a civilization spread across nearly 1 million square kilometers of what is now Pakistan and northwest India. Picture cities like Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, Dhulavira, and Rakhigarhi, with grid-planned streets, sophisticated drainage, and standardized weights, housing tens of thousands of people. This was the Indus, or Harappan, civilization, flourishing from around 3300 BCE to 1300 BCE. They were organized, literate, and advanced, and we cannot read a word they wrote. Their script survives on more than 4,000 objects, mostly small steatite seals, but also pottery, copper tablets, and amulets. And here's the first brutal obstacle. The inscriptions are tiny. The average is about 5 signs. They rarely exceed 26 characters. There's no long, flowing text anywhere, no inscription that runs like a paragraph. That alone cripples any attempt at decipherment. The sign inventory is estimated at somewhere between 400 and 700 distinct symbols. That number matters because it is too large for a simple alphabet, or points instead to a logosyllabic system, where signs stand for words or syllables. The script was most likely written right to left, which scholars infer from the way signs get cramped and squeezed at the left edge of the seals. Now the deeper problem, there is no Rosetta Stone. There is no bilingual object pairing Indus signs with a language we already know. And the language underneath the script is itself unknown. The leading candidate argued for decades by Asko Parpola of the University of Helsinki is some form of Dravidian. Others have proposed different families. None of it can be confirmed. In 2004, a provocative paper by Steve Farmer, Richard Sproat, and Michael Witzel argued something startling: that these symbols might not be true writing at all, but a system of non-linguistic signs, more like heraldry or labels. The counterattack came in 2009 when Rajesh Rao and colleagues used a statistical measure called conditional entropy and found that the sign sequences behave like natural languages, supporting the idea that this really is writing. But even if Rao is right, the brevity defeats us. With text only 5 signs long, even a correct guess for one sign cannot be tested against running prose. And there is no rescue coming. The civilization declined around 1900 BCE as monsoon patterns shifted and rivers like the Gagar Hakra dried. The spoken language behind the script almost certainly went extinct, which means the key is gone. Machine learning projects can map sign frequencies and likely word boundaries, but they cannot conjure meaning from a dead tongue. The seals pair signs with animals like the famous unicorn and the bull. Do the signs name the owner? A god? A shipment of goods? We do not know. This is the purest version of our theme. A message, written by a great people, that we may never read. Next, we go back to objects with no writing at all, and a purpose that died with its makers. Number 6. The Diquís Stone Spheres. In the 1930s and 40s, workers for the United Fruit Company were clearing dense jungle in the Diquís Delta of southern Costa Rica to plant bananas. As the bulldozers tore through, they kept exposing something that did not belong in a rainforest. Stone spheres. Hundreds of them. Smooth, round, and clearly deliberate. More than 300 have now been recorded. They were made by the Diquís culture, with most dating to between 600 and 1000 CE. They range from the size of a softball to giants 2.5 meters across, and the largest weigh an estimated 15 to 16 tons. Most are carved from gabbro, a hard igneous rock, quarried from sources in the Talamanca foothills, sometimes a long way from where the spheres ended up. And many of them are astonishingly close to perfect, made by a people with no metal tools and no knowledge of the wheel. How did they do it? The likely method was patient pecking and grinding with stone hammers, perhaps using cycles of heat and water to flake the surface, followed by careful polishing. But no step-by-step record survives because the culture left no writing. The first formal study was published by Doris Stone in 1943, and the modern authority, John Hoops, of the University of Kansas, has spent years debunking the wild myths that grew around them, and the myths grew fast. The spheres have been tied to Atlantis and to lost super civilizations, none of which holds up. The real mystery is quieter and sadder. We do not know why they were made. The theories include astronomical markers, symbols of chiefly status, boundary or plaza markers, and ritual arrangements. A few spheres found still in place suggest they were once set in deliberate lines and geometric patterns in front of important buildings. But most of that evidence is gone, and gone in a particularly painful way. Treasure hunters, convinced gold was hidden inside, dynamited many spheres open. Others were hauled away to decorate lawns and plazas as ornaments. Every sphere moved as a sphere ripped out of its original arrangement, and those arrangements were exactly the clue that might have decoded their purpose. We destroyed the answer while chasing imaginary treasure. In 2014, several sphere sites were finally protected as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It is also worth repeating because the confusion is so common that these Costa Rican spheres have no real connection to the South African Klerksdorp objects. One is unquestionably the work of human hands. The other is the work of blind chemistry. The Diquís spheres are the New World's great monument of lost reasoning. We know who made them. We know roughly how. We will likely never know why. And at least here, nobody doubts that people made them. The next site is one where even that is in dispute. Number 7. The Yonaguni Monument. In 1986, a dive operator named Kiichiro Arataki was scouting the waters off Yonaguni, the westernmost inhabited island of Japan, near Taiwan. He was looking for good spots to show tourists hammerhead sharks. Instead, beneath the waves, he found what looked like a sunken staircase. A massive block of stone with flat terraces, straight edges, and sharp corners, sitting between 5 and 25 meters down. The formation is roughly 50 meters wide and more than 100 meters long. It has broad parallel platforms, step-like terraces, 90-degree angles, and features that some describe as a stage, a loop road, and carved channels. And it has split the experts in a way few discoveries ever do, because the argument is not about how old it is or who made it. The argument is whether anyone made it at all. On one side stands Masaki Kimura, a marine geologist at the University of the Ryukyus. Kimura argues the monument is at least partly artificial, shaped or quarried by human hands. He suggests it could be anywhere from 2,000 to 10,000 years old. If it was worked when sea levels were lower, near the end of the last ice age, it would have flooded as the oceans rose afterward. He points to what he reads as tool marks, drill holes, a carved face, and deliberately aligned stones. On the other side stands Robert Schoch, a geologist from Boston University. Schoch examined the site and concluded the features are most likely natural. The rock is a Miocene-era sandstone that fractures along flat bedding planes and straight joints, and that kind of stone naturally breaks into rectangular blocks and terrace steps. The skeptics raise one especially strong point. The steps all remain attached to the bedrock. Quarrying produces detached transported blocks, and those are not clearly here. On top of that, this region is intensely tectonic. Earthquakes alone can crack stone into dramatic right angles with no human help whatsoever. No artifacts, no tools, no undisputed inscriptions have been recovered to settle it. Strong currents and the depth make careful excavation difficult. Popular media has tried to inflate it into a lost city, even tying it to mythical sunken continents, and geologists reject all of that. But the core dispute is genuine. The flat terraces and the parallel edges are real, and that is exactly why the debate refuses to die. Kimura has remapped the site repeatedly, describing not one building but a whole network of structures. Shok sees the elegant, repeating handiwork of geology, and because the formation is submerged, ancient, and stripped of context, we may never prove which of them is right. This is the rarest kind of mystery, where we cannot even say whether we are looking at architecture or rock. From a thing that might not be built, we turn now to a civilization that built spectacular things and then erased itself from memory. Number 8. The Sanxingdui Bronzes. In 1929, a farmer named Yan Daocheng was digging a ditch on the Chengdu Plain in Sichuan, southwestern China, when he struck a pit full of jade. It was the first thread of something enormous. Decades later, in 1986, archaeologists excavated 2 great sacrificial pits at the site now called Sanxingdui. What came out rewrote the map of Bronze Age China. The objects belong to the Shu culture, dating to around 1200 to 1100 BCE. That makes them roughly contemporary with the Shang dynasty, but they look like nothing the Shang ever made. The 2 pits held thousands of artifacts, and between 2019 and 2022, 6 more pits were opened, adding over 13,000 more. And the bronzes are deeply strange. There are giant masks with hard, angular faces and cylindrical eyes that jut outward from the face like stalks. There's a bronze figure standing about 2.6 meters tall with its base, with enormous clasping hands curled around something now missing. There's a bronze sacred tree nearly 4 meters high, hung with birds, fruit, and a dragon, almost certainly a model of the cosmos. There's a gold mask, and a gold disc that looks like a sun. None of it resembles the art of the Yellow River heartland. Then comes the haunting part. Almost everything was deliberately broken, burned, and buried in the pits. This was a ritual, a decommissioning of sacred objects, performed for reasons we cannot recover, because the Shu left no deciphered writing. Their gods, their myths, their kings, and their politics are simply gone. Some have noted that much later legends describe a first king of Shu named Kong Kong, who had protruding eyes, and wonder if the stalk-eyed masks depict him. But that link is speculation across more than 1,000 years. Around 1000 BCE, the people abruptly abandoned Sanxingdui, possibly moving to the nearby site of Jinsha. Whether the cause was flood, war, earthquake, or a shifting river is debated. What makes this case so striking is that traditional Chinese history barely mentions the Shu at all. An entire sophisticated, wealthy, technically brilliant civilization had effectively dropped out of the historical record until a farmer's ditch brought it back. Their metallurgy was advanced, using piece mold casting and careful alloying, and isotope analysis hints that some of the metal came from distant sources, implying long trade networks. The pieces found in 2021, including a bronze altar and intricate composite figures, are still being studied and reconstructed. But the central question stands unanswered. Why would a rich society smash and bury its finest treasures? We can describe these masks in perfect detail. We cannot read them. Sanxingdui proves that whole high civilizations can vanish from memory and leave us objects we will never truly understand. Next, we cross to Europe, to the largest field of standing stones on the continent. Number 9. The Carnac Stones. Near the village of Carnac, in Brittany in northwestern France, more than 3,000 standing stones march across the landscape in long, dead straight rows. They stretch for kilometers. The 3 main alignments, called Menik, Kermario, and Kerleskun, run for several kilometers in total, and the Menik alignment alone holds over 1,000 stones. Alongside them sit dolmens, burial mounds, and lone giant menhirs. It is one of the largest collections of standing stones anywhere on Earth, and almost nobody outside archaeology can tell you what it was for. The stones were raised by Neolithic farming peoples between roughly 4,500 and 3,300 BCE. That means Carnac predates the Egyptian pyramids and the main phases of Stonehenge. The stones range from under a meter to over 6 meters tall. Nearby at Loch Mariaker, a single menhir called the Grand Menhir Brisé once stood around 20 meters high and weighed an estimated 280 tons before it fell and shattered. Moving and raising stones like that, with no wheels and no draft animals at scale, is a logistical puzzle that still has no fully satisfying answer. The rows tend to run roughly east to west, and many end near stone enclosures called cromlechs, which hints at processions or ceremonies. But the purpose is genuinely unknown. The theories include an astronomical observatory or calendar, ceremonial avenues for walking, markers of territory or ancestral land, and a religious complex tied to the dead. In the 1970s, the astronomer Alexander Thom argued the stones encoded precise solar and lunar alignments and even a standard unit of measure he called the megalithic yard. Most of those claims are now contested. The builders were pre-literate, so there is no written explanation, and there never was one. The meaning was lost so completely that by later centuries, local folklore explained the stones as a Roman legion that the wizard Merlin had turned to stone. When a culture has to invent a wizard to explain its own landscape, you know the original knowledge is long dead. The number of stones has fallen over the centuries, lost to farming, road building, and removal, and some were re-erected later by antiquarians, which muddies any study of the original pattern. Even the way the stones decrease in height along some rows could be a deliberate visual design, or just the result of selective removal. Modern LiDAR and mapping surveys reveal subtle relationships with the terrain, and recent digs have uncovered post holes in earlier wooden structures, suggesting the site grew and changed over a very long span of time rather than appearing all at once. Nearby passage tombs show the same people practiced elaborate burial, so perhaps the alignments connected the world of the living to the world of the dead. But that is inference. The stones cannot speak, and that brings us to the last and most famous case on this list. A message so large it can only be read from the sky. Number 10. The Nazca Lines. Across the Nazca Desert of southern Peru, between the towns of Nazca and Palpa, the ground itself has been turned into a gallery. There are more than 800 straight lines, around 300 geometric figures, and roughly 70 enormous drawings of animals and plants. A hummingbird stretches about 93 meters. A condor spans some 130 meters. There's a monkey with a spiraling tail, a spider, and a strange figure often nicknamed the Spaceman or Owl Man. These are the Nazca Lines, and they are the most recognizable mystery on this entire list. They were made mostly between about 500 BCE and 500 CE by the Nazca culture, with some figures from the earlier Paracas period. The technique was simple in principle. The desert floor is covered in dark iron-stained pebbles, and beneath them lies lighter subsoil. By removing the dark stones, the makers expose pale lines, like drawing in reverse. The reason they survived for 2,000 years is the climate. The Nazca Desert is one of the driest and least windy places on the planet, so there is almost nothing to erode them away. But here's the question that has haunted everyone since. Most of these figures are so large that you can only take them in as whole shapes from the surrounding hills or from the air. The Nazca had no aircraft. So who were these images for? One leading idea is that the act of making and walking the lines was the point, not the finished view from above. The German mathematician Maria Ricci devoted her life from the 1940s onward to surveying and protecting the lines. She argued they formed a giant astronomical calendar, but that idea was largely undercut when Gerald Hawkins and others tested the alignments against the sky and found they matched no better than random chance. The anthropologist Johann Reinhard offered a different answer rooted in survival. In a desert this dry, water is everything. And Reinhard linked the lines to water and fertility rituals, with paths pointing toward water sources. Many straight lines converge on hubs called ray centers, which may relate to ritual pathways known from later Andean cultures. The animal figures, the spider and monkey and hummingbird, may carry meanings tied to water, fertility, or shamanic belief, but those readings are inferred, not known. The famous claim by Erich von Däniken that these were runways for ancient astronauts is rejected by archaeologists, who point out that the makers and their low-tech methods are well understood. Researchers have shown the giant figures could be scaled up from small models using only stakes and cords, and the story is still growing. Around 2024, an AI-assisted survey led by Masato Sakai, working with IBM, revealed many previously unknown smaller figures. The desert has been damaged by flooding from rare El Niño events, by illegal roads, and even by a careless stunt in 2014. UNESCO listed the site for protection in 1994, but the deepest answer, the precise meaning, depended on a belief system that left no written record. And so, like every case before it, the final truth slipped away with the people who knew it. Step back and look at what just connected all 10 of these. The Shigir Idol, the Indus seals, the silent masks of Sanxingdui, the pre-literate rows of Carnac. In every one, the thing that defeats us is the same. The language died and the meaning died with it. This is worth understanding clearly because it explains why some mysteries are not just unsolved but unsolvable. When archaeologists cracked Egyptian hieroglyphs, they had the Rosetta Stone, the same text written in a language they already knew. When they cracked Linear B, they had enough text and a related language to work from. Decipherment almost always needs a bridge to something known. The Indus script has no bridge, and worse, its texts are far too short to attack statistically. There is simply not enough to work with. A spoken language can carry meaning across centuries, but only if the culture survives to keep speaking it. When a people vanish, the operating manual for their symbols vanishes too. This is the crucial gap. We can know exactly what an object is, a seal, a mask, a standing stone, while having no idea what it meant to the person who made it. Rich imagery does not save us. We can see Sanxingdui's cosmic tree and Nazca's hummingbird in perfect detail and still not read them, because an image without its key is just a picture. That gap is dangerous because it tempts us to fill it with our own assumptions. A museum label can imply a certainty that does not exist. The honest scientific position is to describe confidently and interpret cautiously. New technology and new discoveries may yet help with some scripts, but a truly dead language offers nothing to decode against, and meaning is only half of what we lose. Sometimes the method is lost too. Look again at Puma Punku's machine flat andesite, the missing rock of the Longyou Caves, the near-perfect Diquís spheres, and the colossal stones of Carnac. These pose a different kind of puzzle, not what did it mean, but how on earth did they do it? It is important to separate two ideas. We could absolutely reproduce these things today, with diamond saws and cranes. That is not the question. The question is whether we know how they did it, with the tools and the organization they actually had. And often, we do not. Hand-cutting precise right angles into stone as hard as andesite or gabbro without iron tools is exactly the kind of feat that impresses engineers and invites wild explanations. Experimental archaeology has done real work here, replicating some cuts and some sphere shaping with period-plausible methods. But a great deal remains unproven, partly because the evidence rots. The wooden sledges, the rope rigging, the earthen ramps, the scaffolding, all the perishable machinery that did the heavy lifting, leaves almost no trace. The objects survive. The methods do not. That is why the absence of spoil at Longyou is so genuinely hard to explain, and why moving a 280-ton menhir at Carnac still has no fully agreed answer. The lesson is that lost technology almost never means lost magic. It usually means lost organization, the ability to direct thousands of people and coordinate enormous effort over generations. When that social machine breaks, the know-how evaporates even if the tools were simple. And that raises the question at the heart of two of our cases. How do we even tell something built from something merely found that way? The Klerksdorp Spheres and the Yonaguni Monument sit at the hardest edge of this whole subject because for both of them, the basic question is not who or why, but whether a human was involved at all. The trap is inside us. Humans evolved as relentless pattern finders, and we have a strong bias towards seeing design. Pareidolia makes us find faces in clouds and intention in grooves. So when we see a perfectly round sphere or a flat terrace with a right angle, every instinct screams, maker. But geology is a master forger. Minerals precipitating around a nucleus produce spheres. Sandstone fracturing along its bedding planes produces flat steps and sharp corners. Nature arrives at symmetry and straight lines all on its own. So how do scientists actually decide? They look for context, for tool marks that match known tools, for detached debris that quarrying would leave behind, and for repetition that is too specific to be natural. At Yonaguni, the skeptic's strongest point is that the steps never detach from the bedrock, which is what you would expect from fracturing rather than quarrying. The problem is that submerged sites and billion-year-old rock strip away exactly the context we would need to be sure. The stakes cut both ways. A false positive hands ammunition to fringe claims and lost civilization fantasies. A false negative means we might dismiss something genuinely ancient and made. The honest takeaway is that when serious experts still disagree, as Kimura and Shosh do, that disagreement is a real signal of genuine uncertainty, not a failure of the field. And behind so many of these unanswered questions sits one quiet engine of erasure. Whole worlds disappeared. There's a reason the answers are missing, and it repeats across this list like a drumbeat. Tiwanaku fell to drought. The Indus cities declined as the monsoon shifted and the rivers dried. The Shu abandoned Sanxingdui, the Diquís and the Nazca faded before anyone could write their explanations down. Climate is the recurring eraser. Drought, shifting rains, and rising seas have ended civilizations again and again, and each collapse breaks the chain of transmitted knowledge. This is the fragile part. The deepest knowledge, the why behind the monuments and the meaning behind the symbols, tends to live with elites and specialists, the priests and scribes and master builders. They are exactly the people a collapse scatters or kills first. Lose them, and you lose the explanation while the objects still stand. Sometimes a culture is not destroyed but simply abandons a place, walking away and taking its memory with it. Either way, later peoples inherit the ruins without the manual, and so they do what humans always do. They invent a story. A Roman legion frozen by Merlin, a lost continent, treasure sealed inside a stone sphere. The myth fills the silence the records left behind. The archaeological record itself is biased toward survival. Stone, bronze, and bog-preserved wood endure. Spoken words, painted meanings, and perishable knowledge rot away. Societies that wrote little, or whose language died, are the most vulnerable of all to total erasure. And there is a warning in that for us. Knowledge does not preserve itself. It survives only when someone actively chooses to maintain it generation after generation. Which leaves one last thing to sit with. Every object on this list shares a single simple feature. The people who knew are gone. That is the whole story, told 10 different ways, from a wooden idol in a Siberian bog to giant drawings in a Peruvian desert. It is worth drawing a careful line here between two very different kinds of mystery. Some of these are merely not yet explained. New excavations, better dating, and AI surveys may still crack the Yonaguni debate, or pull more figures from the Nazca sand, or settle how the Longyou Caves were carved. But others are not waiting to be solved. A truly dead language with only short inscriptions, like the Indus script, may have no solution at all, no matter how clever we become. There is nothing left to decode it against. And there is no shame in that. Saying we do not know is one of the strongest things science can say. It is honest, and it is the very thing that keeps these sites studied, protected, and alive in our imagination. Mystery is not the enemy of knowledge, it is the engine of it. Stand in front of any of these things, the stalk-eyed mask, the perfect sphere, the stone that lines up with kilometers of its neighbors, and you feel it. Something deliberate is reaching toward you across deep time, and you cannot quite hear what it is saying. You, watching now, are a fellow investigator in that long effort, no less than the researchers who gave their lives to it. There is a final thought worth carrying away. Our own records, our languages and archives and monuments are no more immortal than theirs were. They survive only as long as someone keeps choosing to preserve them. And maybe that is the strange gift hidden in not knowing. The silence of these places does not push us away from the people who built them. It is the one thing we now share with them across all that time.